Hello, you're watching Leader Speakeasy with me, Luqman Haris.
And me, Rozina Aziz.
Rozina is the co-founder and CEO of Metamorphosa, a former news, media and corporate woman who now mentors, coaches, trains and consults global leaders and entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Luqman. Today we will have a conversation on leading to confront the world's biggest injustices. First, an introduction on our guest.
Not many can put psychologist, academic, activist and supermodel in the same sentence, let alone a real-life resume. But that's exactly what Dr. Anjhula Mya Singh Bais did, which truly speaks of a tendency to keep challenging the norm. Anjhula chose to drop out of medical school to pursue her calling in psychology. From then on, the sky truly was the limit for this young trailblazer. She eventually became Malaysia's only international psychology trauma specialist. But that's just one item in a long list of accomplishments. Anjhula was always a familiar face in activism as well, putting in time and effort to fight for everything from feminism to mental health to climate change. Also named a supermodel by Vogue India, she once graced the cover of a magazine under the condition that it would not be airbrushed, and thereafter received its People's Choice Award for being the role model women most believed in. Now, as the youngest chair of Amnesty International, her agenda focuses on Malaysia becoming a signatory of various UN measures, including the Convention Against Torture and the abolition of the death penalty, all while fighting to destigmatize mental health in order to create a better world for all.
Dr. Anjhula, welcome to Leader Speakeasy with Luqman and Rozina. Let's kick off the discussion by diving into your leadership mantra. So, psychologist, activist, academic, model, quite an impressive resume, not one that we say many would achieve. So how do you weave all that into each other and how do they complement one another?
It's a million-dollar question. A lot of people like to pigeonhole women. You're either this or you're that. There's so many binaries. But I think all human beings are multifaceted. Mm-hmm. So if anything, if you have the talent, you have the aptitude, you have the interest, simply go for it. And I think your value system will be the golden thread that runs through everything. So as a trained psychologist and trauma specialist, that is necessarily mental health is a human right. That informs my sort of human rights activism. I'm all about women's empowerment, so I see all of that through the lens of feminism. And I bring that even into the modeling world, right? Women are under a lot of pressure to look and act a certain way, not necessarily the males have that pressure. So we, you know, all these sort of forms of activism, they tie into everything that I do.
Right. I'm always insecure when I talk to psychologists or psychiatrists because you get a sense that they're reading you all the time and you're very vulnerable.
Which is a good thing.
I'm off duty.
Oh, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm insecure. But psychologist is a challenging and oftentimes thankless job. We all have our own problems, but a psychologist, I would say, has to make others' problems their own problems. But you always knew you wanted to be a psychologist. You even chose to drop out of medical school to pursue it. So what drove this decision?
Yeah, well, I was in the US at that time, and I'm not trying to make a blanket assumption, but you know, there's a very famous New York Times book called Prozac Nation, where the idea is, oh, you're not feeling well, pop a pill. You know, you'll see kids in the US, you know, as young as 5 on their iPads, and then there's a wonderment of why do they have ADHD, attention deficiency hyperactive disorder. And I was fascinated. I mean, definitely psychiatry has its place, which is what I was in med school for. Of course, I believe in science, but I also believe in doing the long-term work, which is psychology, which is talking, feeling, exploring. So that's how I ended up. But I will just say really quickly, psychologists do not take on other people's problems, contrary to what you might think. I simply serve as a mirror in which people see themselves reflected. And my mantra is, I'm connected to everything, attached to nothing.
That's good.
Let's talk a bit about mental health in Malaysia. I mean, you know, you're the right person to talk to about that. At what level do you feel the stigma is at? Is it still stigmatized, or have we gone a long way in that sense?
Yeah, great question. If we were speaking 3 years ago, I would say that it was much higher. But I think the silver lining to COVID-19 is that everybody's like, wow, mental health is a real thing. It's serious. And now psychology has a seat at the table with the, so to speak, hard sciences. It used to be that I would be the last person that people called upon. They might try to go to a religious person, maybe get a spirit exercised out. But I'm the last person. But now it's changing. Now it's changing. I see a lot of organizations and workplaces that are like, here's a mental health break. It's cool.
There seems to be much more awareness.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
And as a psychologist, you deal a lot with trauma as well. Personally, you dealt with it maybe on a smaller, more personal scale with your patients. But now, as chair of a global organization, the way I see it is that you deal with kind of like global trauma on a much grander scale.
Yeah.
So many issues, so many crises. Let's start with Malaysia. How traumatized do you think Malaysians are right now still after coming out of a long, drawn-out COVID episode? And now facing a myriad of life challenges such as a rising cost of living, the weak economy, not having the ability to put enough food on the table for your family, and what needs to change in how the government is communicating and doing things to keep the people motivated.
Yep. So you bring up a really important point, because a lot of times when people think of psychology or mental health, they ground it in the individual. So if you're feeling depressed or anxious, that must be an individual shortcoming or failure. But the approach I take, which is, you know, infused with sort of feminist principles and intelligence, if you will, is that you are a product of your society or environment. If your basic needs are not met, if you're feeling unsafe, if you're feeling the destabilization of so many top leaders and political party changes, coupled with the pandemic, of course, everybody's mental health is going to be affected. Now, it's just going to manifest differently depending you know, on social economic strata and things like that. I personally think, and professionally, that every government, not just Malaysia, should have a psychologist on their panel of advisors. So if they had, let's say in Malaysia, they would have known how to communicate so that people weren't panic buying. You know, words matter, how you use them. There's a lot of research on that. So yes, I do think we're coming a little bit out of the trauma. It's still there, but what I can say, and I travel the world all the time, is that I think Malaysians find solace in each other. It's just one of the kindest people. We saw that in the floods, how, you know, across race, religion, whatever, we're helping one another, and that's beautiful and that's good for mental health.
The hashtag Kita Jaga Kita, which came about 2 years ago.
That's right.
Rosie?
Yeah. So I just want to move the conversation a bit to the more global side. You now find yourself at the forefront of the biggest problems and injustices faced by the global population. What is the challenge of running a global organization with more than 70 national officers and 10 million members now, right?
Oh, around 15 now.
Around 15 now.
Yeah.
So what's the challenge of that to combat some of the world's most pressing problems without the governmental authority or power to do so?
Well, I think it depends how you look at it. The fact that we don't rely on governmental power is our superpower. Our strength is the fact that we are impartial and we're not coming at things with an agenda. And it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, because we have so many members in so many countries, and that's why, you know, our global assembly that just finished last weekend was extremely powerful, is because we're united across the world. We are a movement. But at the same time, the challenge, but I like a good challenge, is that you are dealing with such diverse geopolitical considerations, cultures. I mean, you know, you might be too direct for one culture, too passive for another. So you're always striking the right tone, but it's been an honor of a lifetime.
It's fragile, isn't it? It's very fragile. And we'll touch more about that in the second segment. We have to go for a short break. Leader Speakeasy with Luqman and Rozina. We'll be right back with the Chair of Amnesty International, Dr. Anjhula Mya Singh Bais. Don't go anywhere.
Suatu hari nanti, anda pasti ada idea.
Saya ada idea
yang merubah
segalanya.
Kamilah PUNB dan kami sentiasa bersama untuk membantu perniagaan anda berkembang maju. Nampak tak? Bukan setakat menyediakan pembiayaan, kami juga memberi anda kepakaran untuk mengembangkan perniagaan anda. Pengubahsuaian, inovasi produk, pemasaran, penjualan, pengedaran, peraukanan dan seterusnya, penguasaan global.
Bagusnya.
Inilah PUNB.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground. Dead men, dragons, and dragon queens. Whatever stands in our way, we will defeat.
There is only one war that matters, and it is here.
Return to Westeros with Game of Thrones and new series, House of the Dragon. Switch now.
Ikut aku! Kehidupan ini penuh dengan cabaran.
Dia kata ayah tak suka dia, ayah tak nak terima dia sebab dia OCD.
Habis tu dia nak ini buat apa lagi? Namun, kita harus teguh berdiri dan terus maju ke hadapan.
Is there anybody else on this island? Tak ada orang lain. Hanya kita.
Beranilah. Kalau dia berani, dia naik.
Awak dah banyak tolong saya. Awak bayarkan bil hospital.
Begitu ni. Soul ni sangatlah suci, bos.
Sesiapa yang gagal mencapai mata minimum
akan disingkir. Naik taraf ke pack premium 1 sekarang.
Kita membuat persetujuan dengan pembangkang.
RUU Perlembagaan Pindaan Nombor 3 2022 mengenai peruntukan larangan ahli Dewan Bertukar Parti merupakan isyarat bahawa ahli Parlimen mengamalkan politik matang. Keputusan itu merupakan satu lagi sejarah tercipta.
Dahulukan kepentingan rakyat dan negara terlebih dahulu berbanding politik kepartian.
You are back with Leader Speakeasy with Luqman and Rozina in conversation with the Chair of Amnesty International, Dr. Anjhula Mya Singh Bais. Now, Doctor, issues like the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the death penalty and the treatment of detainees and migrants in Malaysia are delicate yet complicated issues that require buy-in from the government, policymakers and politicians. I know you've elaborated a bit about Amnesty not having necessarily the governmental authority to do so, but you still have to strike that balance as you've mentioned just now. So you deal with so many different layers. It's very fragile, it's very delicate. You deal with maybe vested interests, national sovereignty, economic impacts, even populist politics for some issues. So what is your leadership style, or mantra rather, in tackling these complexities of dealing with governments, and not just that, but getting them to act on pertinent issues?
Yeah. Let me start out by saying that there's not a one-size-fits-all. So if we become so, I mean, we have uncompromising principles and values at Amnesty, but we need to learn to read the room. It's very important. There's a human rights adage, nothing about us without us. So it's very important, you know, we're headquartered, I mean, we have offices everywhere. But if we're dealing with something, for example, in Malaysia, like, you know, Amnesty Malaysia has done amazing work on the abolition, on the road to the abolition of the death penalty. You necessarily want to get the expertise on the ground as well. So having that humility, and learning when to lead from the front and when learning when to lead from the back. And you're absolutely right. Governments are not our enemies necessarily. You know, if they need to be called out, they're called out. But a lot of times we work hand in hand, and they're very valuable partners. So it's also about hope-filled and hope-based communication. Because a lot of times, I think in the past, for a lot of NGOs and human rights, this is what's wrong, this is not, you know, what's not happening. But there's a lot of victories that we've achieved together. When you look at the UN, you know, sustainable goals, and that's with civil society, that's with the private sector, that's with, you know, business, that's with government. So, you know, and I mean, the most shining example of partnerships needed across the spectrum is with climate change. So none of us can afford to say, okay, just ignore governments. So having that acumen and savvy and, you know, we have amazing leaders in Amnesty. So
let's talk a bit about your aim to end discriminatory treatments and persecutions, be it for gender, race, religion, and so forth. So while working with governments remain key, we can't deny that in many societies, discrimination also stems from very deep-rooted biases within that society in itself. So some discriminatory policies, although condemned by global organizations, are still unfortunately popular or widely held by the local population. So do you see this as a systemic problem that you need to tackle, and how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, it is a systemic problem. We need to analyze root causes and having cultural buy-in. So, you know, one of your previous guests, I think, is a shining example of that, Nazir Razik, when he's discussing policies that shouldn't be based on race, but on need. And, you know, one thing, a mentor of mine, a very famed peace conflict negotiator, Sir Ephraim Isaac, he told me, in this age of Insta everything, Insta dry cleaning, Instagram, we're like, we want change right now. And I get why that's important, but I also think, like you're saying, because it's so deeply rooted and systemic, it's not going to happen overnight. There have been such progress and victories in civil society in Malaysia, and we have to be content moving the needle an inch at a time, leaving people in places better than we found it. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, handing the baton to the next person, raising the next generation. And we will keep going. I mean, one of the proudest moments was the fact that, you know, there's been a moratorium on the death penalty in Malaysia since I think either 2018 or 19. And now they made even a bigger move recently. And that's been years in the making. So my message is don't give up. Change is possible. Sometimes it takes time.
But it's kind of a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? Because what I'm saying is, riding on Rosie's question, you don't really sell something unless there's customers buying it. So in other words, sometimes these populist politics, populist statements that tend to be discriminatory, whether it's religious, on a religious nature, in a religious nature, or in a gender manner, or of course race, you won't sell those things unless you know some or a majority of people are actually buying it. So do you actually need to focus on changing the psyche of the population first? Because once the psyche of the population changes, then the politicians have to change the products that they are selling to the population.
Yeah, that's... Can you afford to wait though?
So this is an amazing question, and my answer to it is it's not a linear process, it's iterative, needs a multi-pronged approach. We should be doing consciousness raising and changing in schools, at dinner tables. I have a lot of stay-at-home parents that are like, you know, what can I do? And I'm like, they're like, I'm just a stay-at-home parent. I'm like, that's the single most important job. You're raising future citizens. And make no mistake, with, you know, artificial intelligence, a logarithm, disinformation, it's very easy to create a need or wanting or longing for something you didn't even think you needed. I mean, you know, when you're buying stuff online. So it's not that the population wants it. If you look at the population, I think we're very harmonious on average. We're quite a model. But, you know, power in the wrong hands can be nefarious at times, right? So there needs to be more training for politicians, consciousness raising for the population on ground. Basically, treetops, bottom up, middle out.
Right. Coming back to Amnesty International, what are the challenges to grow AI in stature, influence, and impact here in Malaysia?
Well, I think our executive director would be the best person to answer that. But just generally speaking, because that's, yeah, a lot of times in this part of the world, it's a quick cognitive shortcut to dismiss things like the climate crisis, human rights, feminism, as an evil Western import. That has nothing to do with us. But if you actually study human rights, feminism, it obviously manifests and has different histories and roots, but has been possible, and there's history in every culture in the world. So trying to dismiss that out of hand, saying, you know, that's just a Western import, that has nothing to do with us, and sort of locking boundaries, if not literally psychologically, that's probably the biggest challenge. And, you know, I think it's very important, like I said earlier, not one size fits all. Amnesty Malaysia works and understands intelligently within its remit the cultural context on the ground here. So they know how to navigate it. But we still, I think, with the government especially, we need to, that would probably be our biggest challenge.
I think just as, you know, you wear multiple hats in your life, but then I'm looking at Amnesty International and you know, there's so many areas that you want to focus on, and there's, you know, limited resources. So what to you are the most important difficult issue that you want to focus on, that Amnesty International want to zero in on, and why?
Yep. So we recently, unanimously last year, passed our global strategic framework, which is from 2022 to 2030. And it has two overarching strategic goals, you know, with subsets that include things to, you know, like right of freedom of expression, you know, looking at things with a climate lens, working for indigenous and racialized communities. So we have our strategic framework, and that informs how we use our resources and our approach.
All right.
I think in the world of AI, and then given the emerging challenges, how is the organization adapting in order to meet those goals within these current times?
Yeah, that is something, I won't say that keeps me up at night, but
I mean, leaders are being shaken up by, you know, everything moving, changes coming from all directions. So we're really interested to know.
Yep. So, obviously, when you think of Amnesty, its legacy, its history, it's very deep, it's very rich, it's very influential. But the current drive is really to change inside out our culture. No organization or company always gets it right. But what I can say I'm proud of is that we have embraced and approached much more of being in a learning mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. So a learning organization where we're becoming more and more agile, where if we need to pivot, we need to pivot. If we need to apologize, we need to apologize, which I think is a good role model because nobody gets it right. At the end of the day, organizations and companies consist of people and we're fallible.
All right. Enough with the serious stuff. Rosie, you know what to do?
So, Dr. Anjhula, we'll now move on to what we call the more relaxed, quick-fire questions. You have just 20 seconds to answer each of the questions.
Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the conversation just now. Very insightful, but we do need a break. This segment, our viewers will get the rare chance to get to know you, Dr. Anjhula, up close and personal. 20 seconds for each question, remember? I think it's probably a practice in psychiatry or psychology where you don't think and you just answer straight away.
Yeah, it's called free association. So I'm sure my therapy clients are going to love that I'm in the hot seat.
We'll change the name of the segment just for this episode.
So it's your free fall moment. So tell us, what's the one thing that nobody knows about you until now?
That I was in the United States. I entered a competition for best lips and I got second place and I got a year's worth of lipsticks. So we're talking like hundreds. So yeah, best lips in the US, second place.
Interesting.
How did nobody know about it until now?
Because I kept it hidden.
Until now. You can't escape Leaders Speakeasy, the most hard-hitting talk show on TV. Second question. The craziest thing you've done in your youth?
What makes you think I'm still not in my youth? I could be like, to be continued. But
I like that.
As of now, I was at a royal wedding in Nepal, had a couple glasses of wine. I think I was 18 or 19, and I thought it would be funny to be in Chitwan National Park and to roam around, seriously, in between sleeping rhinos. And they're standing up. Literal sleeping rhinos. Actual rhinos. This is not a zoo. This is a national park. And yeah, so that is youth and that is folly.
I think that's in our top 5 answers to this question. It's not bad.
So, as a psychologist, What has been the most difficult to hear, but very important, pertinent advice that you've ever been given, like you're on the receiving end?
A couple of them, actually. Feelings do not equal facts. Thoughts become things. So it is not what someone has said or done that has an effect on you. It's how you think about it.
The worst advice you've ever gotten?
Don't burn bridges. You know what? I disagree with that. I'll burn the bridge, and the light from the burning bridge will light my way forward.
Wow, that's a good one. Plenty of amazing soundbites.
Need to be burned.
Need to be burned.
Exactly.
How many times have you actually confronted or talked to or met with people of prominence, and you being good at what you do, were able to look them in the eyes and just say, oh my God, you're just faking it. I mean, I can just tell you're not being sincere, you're faking it, and probably you're a bit crazy inside, but of course you don't show it, you don't tell it to the face, you keep a poker face. How many times has that happened to you?
So spiritually, I can read energy. So in therapy sessions, a lot of people are like, how did you know that? I didn't even say anything. I just know. You'd have to delve, I'd have to have a very good reason to say that to someone, because I think words need to be wielded in either truth, beauty, or purpose. Otherwise, don't speak, right? It's better to be silent. But how many times? All the time. I can absolutely read the room. And it's very invaluable as a chair of a board. It's very invaluable as a psychologist. I can absolutely read it.
You just made him even more insecure, as
I'm
you were
insecure.
saying earlier.
I'm insecure.
No, now remember, Luqman, no one can make you feel anything. It's a choice to be either secure or insecure.
No, that's the best advice I've ever
Be
gotten.
brave, heart.
What's the energy in this room right now?
Beautiful.
Sincerely.
Yes.
Truly. All right. On that note,
Fishing. A big thank you to the Chair of Amnesty International, Dr. Anjhula Mya Singh Bais, for an insightful conversation on leaving a better world for future generations.
be sure to join us on Leader Speakeasy with Luqman and Rozina for conversations on leadership as the world strives to bounce back after the pandemic. I'm Luqman Haris.
And I'm Rozina Aziz, wishing you the very best in your career, business and leadership journey. Stay safe, stay resilient.